In 1977, upon orchestrating his prison escape, Billy Hughes held the family hostage for over 2 days. This hostage takeover will result in him being the first prison escapee to be shot dead in the UK modern times. What brought him to commit this crime has since been described as the real-life story of Jekyll and Hyde, where one man's evil alter ego will not repent or accept responsibility for his evil ways. Who was William Hughes and how could he have been stopped in the years prior to his escape from prison? Detective Unit! No, let me crack my bone. I'm an old person now. Let me crack my bone. This did not just happen. Detective Unit! Did you miss me? I have been absent for about 2 weeks, but now I'm here to tell you the last couple of stories of this year. This is going to be the last multi-parter. Why? Okay, so why have I been absent and why is this the part that I'm telling you now instead of December when I should be telling you this story? Your homegirl turned 30. Yay! And I have also been having stomach issues. Yay! So, I have been on bed rest. You see this bed behind me? Bed rest. Been in this bitch, this area, for a long time. For a long time. So, I have had this book on my reading list for the longest time, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna read it in December, wrap this year up with a two-parter, leave that, like, you know, do that for Christmas. No, I have been on bed rest this week, so, thought might as well read this great book that I would actually recommend. So get your hands on it, but rather wait for part 2. Don't spoil the story for yourself if you don't know it already, and then get the book. It's really well written, and it's partially written by the police officer that actually brought Billy Hughes down, which we're going to be talking about in part 2. I usually don't find stories that are old-timey interesting, let's call them that, beyond like 90s really? Early 2000s, I don't really remember covering many stories that have happened prior to that. Well, Marilyn Monroe, things like that. But usually I'm not attracted to those stories, and that is because of a comical aspect. Okay, hear me out. None of these true crime stories are funny. However, the way that people went about resolving crimes, preventing crimes, catching criminals without the Holmes database, without just the general database where they would collect witness testimonies. I can't speak today. This is great. This is already going great. Witness testimonies, DNA evidence, anything where then like the police stations communicated with one another. It just gives it almost a comical event, because I truly shouldn't be sitting here today telling you this story where somebody has clearly been escalating and not just been shut in prison forever, not to go out and commit any further crimes, and that is the part we're going to be discussing today, and then put a whole family through an actual horror show, like what we're going to be talking about in part 2 as an actual horror movie, like shit that you see portrayed that's fictional, but it happened in real life. And again, we just shouldn't be sitting here talking about something like what had happened in Preston and in Pottery Cottage when it comes to Billy Hughes, but we are. So that's the reason why this story is so gripping to me, because I think it's really great showcase of just how far we have come when it comes to gathering police evidence, like actually putting people behind bars, but also it then highlights all of the flaws, all of the drawbacks that we have learned from and that still might be happening today, which is something we're going to be talking about more in part 2. Could something like this still happen today? And why? Like, why? Because there's no excuse for something like this, anything similar to happen today. But I feel like a lot of people might actually read this story thinking like it still might be the case, which is saying something about the justice system. So I think the story is interesting on multiple levels. It's so multi-layered. And with that, of course, it comes with multiple trigger warnings. So we're going to be talking about the themes of domestic abuse. In particular, I'm referring to part 1 here now. Rape, battery, just extreme displays of violence. And something beyond that I find triggering is how these themes are discussed, obviously, in the context of 50s to 70s, 1950s to 1970s. So there's a lot of just archaic discourse when it comes to especially the topics of rape and how people have just seen rapists as just like typical criminal, like level 1, just whatever the hell, and like the punishments to do with rape were just like, oh, they're not violent, they're not violent individuals. It's triggered me in so many fucking levels. It will trigger you as well, so if it's something that you will find triggering, that you don't want to listen to, click out and find other lighter topics on this channel. There are lighter topics on this channel. There are topics without like any trigger warnings, I think. You tell me if I'm wrong, because I do like the darker side of life. But that being said, I don't like the darker side of life. I am interested in it. It fascinates me. I want to understand the psychology of it. Oh, Jesus Christ. Almost got me there, almost got me there. I saved myself. You're a nerd. They know you're a nerd. They know you're literally like not into the dark side of life. That being said, we have to start this story because we have a lot to go over with here, and we have to start it off with Billy Hughes. Rather, actually, the book gives us the insight on his ancestors, which kind of might provide you more of an understanding how he was actually brought up, which might explain again who he became to be, or rather why he resorted to the initial first, like, couple of crimes that he had committed. Initial first, kind of like saying the same thing there. Today, English is not a thing. This is great, because again, your videos last for like 2 hours. Billy Hughes and his ancestors. Let's go. All of Billy's ancestors have been from the northwest of the UK. So we are talking about the city called Preston, that's between Blackpool and Manchester. All of the Hugheses, really, up until Billy was born and with some of his siblings, this is when something would change, were quite ambitious. The women would run herbalist shops, while the men would be in decorating business. So Billy's dad, Thomas Hughes, was born in May of 1924. After the Great War, the city where they lived, Preston, had experienced quite a few changes. There were advances in engineering, manufacturing, and there were thousands of council houses that were built. Now, this would promise a lot of homes for the people like Thomas to bring his family in. So the Hugheses would live in an older property on Pump Street. I am now going to read you a paragraph on the jobs that the Hughes family, including Thomas, have had, and you will then pause the video if you can't figure out what the jobs are, just to think for a second, like, what are these professions? Because I couldn't figure it out, I had to Google it, okay, because I'm special. But yeah, let me know if I'm just, I don't know, too young. Am I too young, guys? Am I too young? Yeah, let me know if my 30-year-old self is too young, or did you just perfectly understand that I just don't have that comprehension on English? Okay, don't bum me out. Just let me know when I read this paragraph, did you understand what the professions were, and why did you understand them? Okay, that will bum you out inevitably. Shut it! So, as I was saying, Thomas himself worked as a bobbin weaver after leaving school. His elder brother William followed the father into decorating trade. Cool, I understand that part, okay? My English is not that hard. While their mother worked as a char lady following the closure of the herbalist shop. Do you know what bobbin weaver was? Did you know what a char lady was? Well, I didn't, but I googled it. So bobbin weaver, apparently, there's only one picture that comes with that actual title, and it's like of 2 ladies just weaving. It has to do with like thread and weaving and knitting and doing something to do with that. I couldn't even find what it is. So if you knew, good job. Round of applause for you. Char lady just meant a cleaning lady. Did you know all of that? I didn't. We move on. His dad was 15 when the war broke out, so he ended up joining the army. And he worked as a painter there, and this is when he would meet Billy Hughes' mom called Mary. What was his mom's profession, you might ask? She was a jute spreader in a textile factory. We are learning things today. This is an English lesson, actually. If you really think about it, This is an English lesson. The two of them would marry in 1946, and both of their parents were there as witnesses. However, a lot of people would speculate that this might have been a shotgun wedding situation because Mary was already 6 months pregnant, and she started living with Thomas at 29 Pump Street. This is where she would give birth on 8th of August 1946, and William Thomas Hughes, or their Billy, will be born. 5 siblings are going to be born after Billy in a quick succession. There was Barbara in 48, Ellen in 1950, David in 51, Malcolm in 52, and Brian in 54. So there was at best like 2 years between each and every sibling. What this meant though was that money was very limited when it comes to both of the parents and also really all of the children. And if you remember, Billy would be the oldest of them, so he was really playing a role of a caretaker for the majority of his life, but especially in these couple of the first years. So money was scarce, and Mary was only working between the pregnancies and sometimes as a cashier. But this is when Thomas decides to rejoin the army. So suddenly the situation changes, and actually, from what I have seen, all the way up until Billy's teenage years, and really his siblings' teenage years, he lived quite a good life. Actually, the kids did live a good life because his dad rejoining the army meant that the whole family would eventually move onto a ship. The book makes me believe that this has been the case in the first couple of years of Billy's life as well, that the dad would kind of go onto the ships and sometimes he could invite the family. But it definitely became the case when Billy was 11 years old. All of them boarded the ship called SS Nevasa in Southampton in January of 1958. And it will be between then and July that year, so for roughly about 6 months, that the family would actually go towards Hong Kong area. This is where they were actually provided with a huge home, a large bungalow in its own grounds, and the children could play there. But also what Billy remembered during this time was his time on the ship. It was amazing for the kids. They were just educated by the other officers on the ship. They could play, they could look for sharks in the ocean. It was safer than that, I believe, but the book kind of makes you think like as if those kids could just run into the ocean whenever, which again, it was the 50s. They could do whatever the hell they wanted. They lived like their best life when it comes to the ship. And then also they suddenly had that complete shift from the poverty to a possibility of a better life. However, any sense of normalcy, any sense of stability had been interrupted in July that year, and the whole family had been asked to leave. And this is because Thomas, the father, had been discharged from the army. It is said that either this is because of his bad health or because he crashed an army vehicle while drunk. So, as a result, the whole family now returns back to Preston. Upon returning to the area, they realized just how much it had actually changed. And I think this didn't resonate with the family, even with the parents, as quickly as it should have, because they first went to Blackpool from Hong Kong, and then they returned to Preston, and then they returned to Palm Street, and they realized the house where they lived just 6 months before was razed to the ground. The factories were defunct. There were just no jobs in the area suddenly. And at this point, the parents are just taking any jobs that they can. But this leaves Billy, who is at this point 12 years old, to take care of all of his younger siblings, which is like 5 of them. So at the age of 12, he's just being left in charge of these kids as a caretaker. And it is said, and from everything that I could find, Billy had never been in an abusive home, right? He had never been brought up in such a household, in such circumstances that would explain anything that he would do in the future. However, here, in terms of what he resorts to do right now, as like the first part of his criminal career, you can partially understand it. They are now back to extreme poverty. Billy is left basically to take care of his siblings while his parents are working around the clock trying to bring the money to the table. And he will resort to burglaries, shoplifting, and then he would also resort to violence. So that part we can't justify. What I'm trying to say is there is a part of Billy's criminal career that can be justified, and that is the part that is related to survival. Survival instinct, getting the money to basically get food and water for him and his own siblings. However, at every single point in this story, he pushes it towards where he shouldn't be pushing it, and that in turn tells you something about Billy, and something that a lot of people in the police force will voice about him, and that is that Billy might have actually been a psychopath, that there is just a glaze behind this man's eyes, that there is just something completely dead when you look into him, when you look into his soul, because yet again, there's nothing in the past, there's no abuse, he hasn't been beaten by his parents constantly day in, day out. In fact, he had described the time on the ship himself, and just like in general, his childhood is quite like a happy, content one, all the way up until this point when he had to fend for his family. However, there's nothing to explain the violence that he is going to exhibit. Billy was at this point 12 years old, and he was just not interested in school whatsoever. However, he was also described to be of just really small stature, so like he was just really tiny boy with his fair hair and just deep, deep blue eyes. And it is because of his height that he will just be consistently teased by his schoolmates. And this would enrage him to the point that he would actually start fighting, rather protesting using his fists. He would instigate fights in order to prove himself. And eventually this would mean that he would gain a reputation as somebody who was almost incapable of backing down. What his friend would describe is they would kind of just go to the field, like do the typical shit that people would do when they would skip classes and stuff, and they would just be picking blackberries near Blackpool. And at one occasion when they were doing this, there was this wild horse that approached them, and then like everybody else was just backing down, just like, okay, cool, time to go. It's a horse claiming his territory, but not Billy. He picked up a plank of wood and then started beating this horse until the horse was the one to back away. And this is just the kind of person that he was. Because of the lack of his academic interest, he leaves the school at the age of 15, and this is when the history of him not being able to hold a job also starts showing up. So he gets the job as a fitter in the factory, however he was dismissed like a couple of days in, so his dad gives him a job as a trainee decorator, but this job also only lasted for a week. Then he gets a third job in literally a month as a metal polisher, and this came to an end when Billy was caught stealing from his employer. So this is going to be the first time when he would go to Preston Juvenile Court. However, all the way up until I believe he was 18, even at that point, his name will be protected because he will still be sort of in the juvenile justice system. So it will only be about 3 years from now that, you know, his records wouldn't be sealed, and basically that people could gauge on the criminal history. So truly, even though there's about 21 charges that we are aware of, and I have really stopped counting when it comes to this book, there might have even been some more that might have just been protected by the juvenile record at that time. What we do know, however, is that 1961 would be the year when Billy would finally enter the British legal system. And this would be because of just the chain of burglaries that he would commit, sometimes by himself, sometimes with the friends that he was hanging out with. So he would break into the Bear dry cleaners. This is how people have actually locked him onto the system, because he would just steal random stuff and then commit other burglaries during the night, because it would usually never stop with one. So on this evening, he went into these dry cleaners, stole electricity board stamps and Christmas stockings, and then continued to commit another burglary with a friend of his, and was caught by the police. He then bolted from the hairdressing salon with cash and small display items on his person. And he even managed to give officers the slip and set off in a rage towards a dock area, which is where he worked at the time. When the police caught him that evening and asked him why did he vandalize all of these places that he also robbed that night, he would say that the police had just caught him, so his initial response was to be mad. And in a lot of articles you will see, and a lot of videos that I have seen on this case, Billy being referred to as mad. Oh, he's just mad Billy. I personally don't think that Billy had been mad. I don't think that if he had been that incoherent in his mind, he would have been able to do anything else that we're going to be speaking about in this video. I think Billy was a lot smarter than we give him credit for. I think he knew how to get away with things a lot better than, again, we definitely fought through in history, and I think so because of how I'm going to split this video, and then you can tell me if you disagree with me. So this is now 1961, right? And I want you to pin that in your head, as there's 16 years in between this and the crime that we're going to talk about in part 2, before somebody could have stopped this man for good. So again, for 16 years, somebody has a criminal career for 16 years. It could be luck, it could be incompetence when it comes to the police system, definitely that, all throughout this video. But also it could be somebody who just knew the justice system as the back of his hand and knew how to manipulate it. You'd let me know what you think about that. But now, because I have told you, like, there's so many charges when it comes to this video, for us not to spend forever talking about literally just Billy's childhood and rather teenage years, I have split the rest of his criminal career in 3 parts. So the first part, we're still here talking about his burglaries and violence towards the officers that were arresting him. So this is his early age and then early 20s. Then we are going to be talking about his personal life and violence directed towards one woman in particular that will become his wife. And then we have the final escalation that changed everything, and that is when Billy finally escalated to rape and his life would be changed forever. People would say that a lot of crimes that Billy had committed here, him lashing out, actually fighting even, like the arresting officers, so committing crimes that didn't just stop at him burglarizing a place, during these years actually happened because of his frustration to have been given that job of a caretaker when he thought like he was a child himself. And for those crimes, well, sometimes there wouldn't really be even shops. His next couple of crimes would include housebreaking, theft of articles and money, and committing malicious damage, amounting to 31 pounds then, which is probably like hundreds of pounds now. So when he was finally then brought to juvenile court on these charges, a couple of things have happened that usually happen to juvenile criminals back then. So if you are in the UK and you are versed in true crime, you're probably familiar with a mental health institution called Broadmoor, the psychiatric hospital, and you might know of institutions called Borstals. So those were institutions that I believe are now shut down altogether, where they would cramp thousands of juvenile repeat offenders. So this would be the fate that Billy Hughes was about to face. These institutions would host over 6,000 repeat offenders annually, from what I have seen in the book, and these offenders would all be between the ages of 15 and 21. So Billy would be in and out of Borstals between this point and obviously after he was to face justice as an adult. And a couple of things that happened here, from what I have assessed in the book, is when he was actually brought to the trial for, breaking and entering into the house, stealing possessions, this is when his mom would actually finally disown him. And his relationship with his parents is really confusing from this point on. Like, it is said that he would sometimes write them letters from Borstels and then later from prison. However, that, you know, the parents would kind of just superficially stay in touch. They wouldn't really care so much about Billy, and not much about their relationship with Billy is known from this point on. And it also begs you to pin in your head for later use, like, was Billy doing all of this just to manipulate the parole board, for example, in this instance. So his mom disowns him here. And another thing that happens is in Borstels, like, they weren't famous for this, but it's again kind of like with Ilan School, with Opus Dei. There is always that secretive agenda of like what actually happens there in terms of punishment. And when it came to Borstel, it was said that there would be some form of corporal punishment that was exhibited when it came to these juveniles. And this is in particular called birching, which is the corporal punishment using the birch rod that's typically applied to the buttocks of a teenager, here in this case, sometimes on their back and or shoulders. So if Billy, throughout the whole of his life, was to have ever had any corporal punishment, from everything that I have read, it did not happen up until his late teenage years, mid-teenage years, up until he actually ended up in these institutions. So it never happened within his family, rather it happened due to his crimes as a punishment that was available and very controversial at the time. As you could imagine, anything to do with reform, anything to do with bringing those individuals into those institutions and them then leaving those institutions feeling reformed, feeling like they are actually contributing members of the society, might have actually worked in a very different way back then. So just to give you the flair of what Billy could have experienced in one of those houses, the way that Borstal was run was on the similar lines to boarding school. So each of the establishments was divided into houses where inmates would sleep in dormitories, education and sports were compulsory, and discipline would be strict. So any sort of deviance from anything to do with the rules in that house would result in the withdrawal of small privileges, but more serious transgressions were punishable by them being confined to solitary confinement or a chokey. They would be offered things like vocational training, again in an attempt for them to get a job, get employment once they're actually out, but this was on first served basis and it was aimed at securing employment upon discharged. So throughout their stay, inmates would be graded on 3 levels and the home leave would be granted before final grading and release. It was said that Billy would spend 17 months in Borstal. From what I have seen, again, because we don't have like any records in black and white in front of us, this would kind of be on and off. So he'd get a couple of months there, then be released, then would commit other crimes, then would be sent back in. So this would be almost a year and a half. And during that time, some of his obsessions that will become recurring obsessions throughout his life would emerge. By the social workers in those institutions, Billy would be described as immature multiple times, unable to control himself, somebody where no progress has been made, who needs to be kept on a tight rein, a troublemaker, irresponsible. However, the obsessions that have emerged here, and also something that will be repetitive for the future, is how Billy knew how to twist those opinions on the report just enough for whenever a parole case would emerge, whenever he was to actually appear in front of a parole board, have a chance to get out, for the people to be like, I mean, he isn't that bad, right? Like, he's immature, he doesn't seem to have interest in XYZ. However, he has actually owned up on quite a few things. Because, for example, Borstels would welcome the institutional concept of a healthy body, equating to a healthy mind. So, you know, they would get to participate in like sports and exercise, and Billy thrived on that. So, of course, you know, if like you were then to appear in front of a parole board, well, somebody's more inclined to be like, I mean, he did try to stay healthy. He did try to not choose violence onto like fellow whatever inmates, fellow people staying here. Rather, he was just like weightlifting, getting ripped, all of that. Like he tried. He knew just exactly how to influence these people to change their mind, because all of you see, everything that you will see in these reports is like, he is immature, he should never be let out, and then they're like, I mean, he did exercise though. Make it make sense. One other way that Billy saw through when it came to Borstal ethos was what they looked for when it comes to somebody being reintroduced into the society. He knew that what they were after is somebody proving that they have some connections with the world, or rather, you know, not like the criminals of the world, like not like his old friends, but rather his family. So he would write to the family, and as you know, at this point, him and his mom are not on speaking terms. The woman disowned him. However, he would manage to influence them, convince them that he had changed, to the point that the parents would actually accept to take him in every single time that he had been released from these Borstals. So just for you not to think that I'm delusional, this is genuinely the next paragraph. So after they had called him immature, all of that, they were like, hey, he ticked 2 boxes. One of them, he exercised. He, instead of beating somebody up, has actually been getting ripped. And then the second one is, hey, his parents are going to accept him. So the next paragraph here, meaning the next report on Billy, and the whole reason why they would let him out on the streets was, well, positive comments on his report. He's mature, self-confident, doing well on painting and decorating vocational training course. Which meant, after spending 17 months in these Borstals, in October 1965, he actually ended up being released. This didn't last for long, because after a month of living with his parents, he resorts back to heavy drinking and starts living with his friends. And this is where whatever I have said before in terms of the early criminal career, this is definitely a cutoff point for that, where Billy did things for survival. There might have been a couple of months in there where he was pissed off, you know, the family had left him to his own devices, he had to fend for his siblings. This stops being about his siblings real quick, if it ever even was. It was said in the book that actually most of the male siblings in Billy's family, so most of his younger brothers, ended up resorting to crime. One of them will actually end up committing some crimes with Billy, as you'll discover later in this story. But this stops being about survival, about fending for the family, about taking care of them, if it ever was even that. Like, I think it still was in the first couple of months maybe of his criminal career, and then it just stops being that and starts being about Billy's self-fulfilling prophecy. It starts being not even about shoplifting, not even about him actually getting any food, anything out of that, any money to like survive and fend for himself. It's just about him exhibiting extreme violence, exhibiting harm, and just doing things for the thrill of it. And then getting caught, trying to escape. If he can't escape, he will find a way to manipulate the justice system and get himself out to do the exact same thing over and over again. This begins the in and out of the prison system portion of this video, because at this point it is still Borstal. He would be sent out at the pretenses of repairing the relationship with his parents. Like, he even was said to have had a girlfriend that he would correspond with when it came to him being in these juvenile institutions. You know, he would plan like to have a job and then he'd get out. He wouldn't have a job, like he couldn't keep one for longer than a week. He would break with his girlfriend, like him and his parents' relationship would suck. So in 1966, once released again, a week after, he put these 2 women on guard and he decided to rob a gambling place, but they were spotted by the police. He was caught with like a screwdriver in his hand, so again, he was brought before court. And every single time, something that I have observed after having read this book, and I don't think this played to Billy's character, but nobody freaking points it out, right? So every single time he gets a defense lawyer, whether somebody pays for it or rather he gets them for free, gets the legal representation for free, What Billy hears from these early days is obviously the defense lawyer doing their job of justifying their client's actions. So here, for example, the defense attorney says like, well, my client spent 4 out of 19 years at this point of their life in and out of these institutions and would benefit from probation. He ended up being sentenced to 18 months in prison here at the age of 19. But this is something that I kept seeing again and again, where the defense lawyers, yes, are just doing their job. But I'm thinking, like, if you are in this system, like, if you are in the system, since you are technically in your early teenage years, and then you hear somebody justifying your actions on repeat, you go into the system and you come out, and you will never take responsibility for your actions, because the only thing you know is like, oh no, this man just justify what I did, like, and I agree with him, and I'm gonna go out and do the same thing again, because then they're gonna do the same thing, and just be like, no, 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 the institutions are the problem. I have spent 4 years inside of them. I'm just gonna go out and do the same thing because I am never the problem. I'm never the issue here. Finally, we are here now with Billy being of legal age, and this will be the sentencing that provided for a watershed moment in Billy's life. The one from the small-time crook his friend described him to be, saying Billy could be talked or goaded into the crime, but he was scared stiff of prison. To the person who will do anything to stay away from that exact institution, his friend would continue to say, I'm sure that was why, in the end, he committed those terrible murders. He was desperate not to go back to jail again. Billy would serve his time in an area called Walton, and he would serve it as a Category B prisoner. And this observation that I have read in the book truly defines how they treated Billy at this stage, but also like 15 years later when it came to the offenses that he would commit then as a grown-ass man. Because Category B is described as designed for those where the highest conditions of security are not necessary, but for whom escape must be made very difficult. He ends up being released in 1967, but then he breaks into a store, steals scrap copper, and then is returned to Risley 8 weeks after being released, sentenced to 2 years in jail. In our timeline, we are now exactly 10 years from the Pottery Cottage murders. So 10 years prior to Billy actually escaping prison and managing to commit those crimes. And this would be the commentary from the parole board committee. This is the most comic relief that you will receive during this video, so just bear with me, because he was described as pathetic. It said that he seems ashamed of himself and there is hardly any self-respect or ambition after nearly 6 years. It's difficult to get any idea of his attitudes. He is cooperative but makes little positive contribution to an interview. His response to prison is only fair, and although his stay may teach him how to improve his prison standards, it is difficult to see how they will benefit him outside. Once again, the prospects of successful rehabilitation are poor at this stage. He truly hated his time in jail, and, unsurprisingly so, was the subject of 8 disciplinary reports. For trafficking, nobody really explains what that means here, like does it mean just trafficking, like contraband in jail? What kind of trafficking? We don't know. Fighting, absenting himself from work, and bad language. His conduct would be described as indifferent, and he was not prepared to give any guarantee that he will attempt to desist from crime. Yet again, when you read reports like this, you're like, okay, they're seeing through his glib, right? They're seeing through Billy's manipulation to like, oh, still I'm typing, like, writing my little letters, not typing, there's no typing in the poem, he's writing his little letters to the family. I'm just like attempting to be this great citizen, like I'm lifting weights and like acting all macho and like not beating people up. No, people are seeing through the glib. People are seeing that he is actually exhibiting all of this violent behavior and they will not let him out. And no, you are yet again wrong, my man. Why would you think we are here? Because every single time these are the reports, like, he is the worst person ever. He will commit crime. He will murder people. Let's let him out, won't we? Like, show me, like, let's just do it. Let's just let this man out. And it just baffled me every single time. Because literally the next paragraph is like, he ticked a couple of boxes. Let's push him into the world. don't kick him. Like, the way you give fucking birth and you're like, yeah, just let this child fend for himself. Not like that. There are good parents out there. Where did my mind just go? Anyways, back to the story. Fuck. He is released back into the world in 1969, and this is when he would move in with his uncle. Because yet again, we kind of don't know like of his relationship with his parents, and were they of the understanding that Billy was just doing it in order for him to be released out of jail. And here it takes him 3 days to resort to crime. At this point, it would never take him like more than a week. Like, he would be released and within a week he'd fuck up. Like, he would not be able to resist going to crime for less than like, for more than a couple of days. This time he ended up headbutting the policeman who caught him burglarizing a place and punched him to the ground, kicking this policeman repeatedly, and then finally being stopped by other police officers. He would get 6 months in jail for this. So after serving about 6 months in jail for this, he is now released in the summer of 1969. He manages the whole 2 months before being caught again, because we don't know like how many times he actually struck and hasn't been caught. He even moved in with his girlfriend at the time, and this is when he would get charged with burglary and theft and returns to jail. And this is the most bizarre fucking thing, because there's like 1 paragraph on it in a book, right? But here he manages to escape after he is imprisoned, and he manages to be on a run for 3 weeks. 3 weeks this man is on a run, his first prison escape, and during that period he finds a job, which again, he can keep a job for 3 weeks, and he finds a place to stay. And nobody really knew of him how to find him in those 3 weeks. The only reason he actually got caught is because he got drunk and then started driving and hit this van, and a cop was just patrolling on the streets and just passed by and saw like this car hitting a van and like Billy trying to emerge and walk out, and they arrest him and they're like, oh shit, this is the man that we have been looking for like 3 weeks. Allow it. As he was brought now to court, not for like prison escape or anything really here, well, those charges would amount later, but he was brought to the court for drunk driving. Well, because his girlfriend rejected him at that time, when he was actually brought before the judge, he had a dramatic gesture of pulling out a razor blade and then drawing it across his throat and wrists. He was rushed to the hospital, he had survived and had like a couple of stitches. But this is when he started insisting that he wanted to die. However, everybody else just saw this as hysterical behavior and premeditated but not carried out with any great determination, which there's so many things that are problematic in this story. And so many things that again people aren't like picking up on. How did he have a blade inside of a courtroom? Like, there were screams for help. This man never got any therapy, any mental health thing, and like at some points I can feel some pain for this guy, because clearly he had not been treated for anything that was actually going on in his head, because otherwise we would have known like, was he actually a psychopath or did he have any mental health issues, and maybe could have taken medication for it. But also then, so much negligence, so much fucking... This man had already escaped from prison, something that he would do and why we are hearing this story yet again. And also he managed to smuggle contraband inside of an actual courtroom, and not like, he wasn't determined enough to like die by suicide. Focus had to be on other points, like mental health has never been considered here, and also the way that this man had just gotten away with anything, escaping prison and bringing a blade inside of a courtroom. After this incident in court, he was said not to have received any counseling, but he was finally put on an escape list. And you'd think like, okay, at least something. No, because he was released back into the public in that same year, like 1969. He just got reduced sentence and was released back. I don't understand. However, at this point, as you know, he had a girlfriend, and during that short stay in prison, he tried to transfer to where his girlfriend was, which was Winchester from what I remember, but that was denied. And then he kind of gave up. He was like, oh, fuck this relationship, right? Like, too much effort. He finally gave up on that, and that whole dramatic thing, which kind of again makes me think like there's some instability that maybe could have fixed with some medication when it came to Billy. However, then as soon as he was released, he went to Winchester and managed to convince this girl to like take him back and move in with him. So for me, the way I see this and like the way he can just switch up and just resign on a woman or anything that like he is pursuing when in jail is because he either knows he will manipulate his way once he's out, or he knows that he will manipulate his way into somebody else's life, because it is all temporary for him. As much as he didn't want to go back to jail, he probably knew that will be the case in the future. So he just wanted a temporary abode while he's out, and hopefully like that would be like a more permanent thing. But I don't think that he ever had like a plan of like, okay, he's gonna go out and now live with his girlfriend, and then like that woman will become alive and they'll live happily ever after and he will never resort to crime. I don't think like not resorting to crime had ever been a plan in Billy Hughes's head. So once he now convinces this girl to take him back, there was a note on his file that said that he informed the authorities he was living with his common law wife in Portsmouth and had one child. And according to the book, I don't think that this woman was ever his wife. I believe that he only was married once. But it is said that he did have at least one child prior to the woman we're going to be speaking about shortly. Something that I feel you have heard me say a million times already in this video: this doesn't last for long. His freedom doesn't last for long. His next set of charges brought against him in November 1969 will be for drunk and disorderly behavior, assaulting a police officer, theft of a copper cistern, the man fucking loved copper, and handling stolen goods. Now, when he was brought to court here, it seemed like finally he got at least a couple of years. He got 3 years in jail, and there was a note that was attached to his records about his previous escape attempts. Again, in prison, he knows how to get what he wants, so at the beginning of the sentence, he wasn't even allowed to eat meals in the canteen, and this was because he was basically deemed to be violent towards inmates, and his record just wasn't even allowing him to go in there because, of course, he was on the, likely to escape list. And then later he made good progress with his work and gave no trouble, so he was allowed to go into the canteen. Just the same pattern of behavior here shows up. And as he realized this time he is in jail for a while, at least until his next parole hearing, he also decides to commit to some other decisions. This is when he, besides getting ripped, like exercising, getting big, because of course that was always the complex, he used to get bullied when he was smaller, and now he fights on the streets and he needs to be a big guy, he also makes decisions on what tattoos he wants to get in prison. I don't know how they were getting that in prison. I don't care, because they're so freaking dumb. He of course gets love on one hand, like on the knuckles of one hand, and then like hate on the knuckles of the other. He got eagle on like a part of his body. He got his girlfriend's name, that we know is Diane at this point, even though we know nothing about this girl, across his chest. The eagle had like the talons as if like going out for the prey, like protracted, and then also on his back he had a single tattoo of stylized snake with a tongue and a tail and the fangs dripping blood. In 1970, despite of these bizarre decisions, somehow the parole board refuses his parole. However, that doesn't again last for long, because in October of 1971, Billy walked out of a prison a free man. In his pocket, he had a one-way ticket to Preston. However, he decides to detour and to go to Blackpool in order to have a fresh start. The following day, he will end up meeting a woman who is to become his wife, bringing us to part 2 of Billy's criminal career here. This will encompass the period between 71 and 77, and the third part really will focus on the very last offense, the one that will send him to the prison that he will eventually end up escaping from. So Billy was actually described as a fairly attractive person. for the time, but your typical possessive guy who would be the one turning to abuse and cheating while projecting the cheating part onto the partners and while wanting to control every aspect of their life until he was the one to move on, until he was the one to catch the eye of somebody else and then move on. And we know what he was like as a husband eventually from the woman whose name we know and who will become his wife, Jean Nadine. Jean was Blackpool born. She was the illegitimate child and also out of work for money-related offenses herself. At this time, she had married before and she had a child from a previous marriage, a daughter. And she was also unemployed this time. So she was living with, I believe her daughter was 5 years old at the time, in the lodgings and extremely vulnerable, as you could imagine at this point in time. And if you recall, Billy met his soon-to-be wife a day after being released and moving to Blackpool. So how exactly did that happen? Jean learned from a friend that a guy named Billy Hughes was just released from prison and he was looking for a place to stay. So that didn't cause any red flags when it comes to her. She had some run-ins with the law, as I have just mentioned, so she let him come around to take a look. And she noticed how good looking Billy was. So she allowed him in. That night they went on somewhat of a date, I would assume, and she immediately fell for him and she thought that he fell for her as well. They ended up celebrating his release and that night she ended up sleeping with him. And soon enough, actually 6 weeks later, Jean realized that she was pregnant. And Billy seemed to be thrilled about it, promising to be there and to be there for her child. A couple of problems immediately started showing up because, of course, in the beginning, when he is courting a woman, when he is trying to get into their life, to probably live there for free as well, and just promising like, oh my god, he's gonna get a job, he's gonna keep a job, he's gonna be there for the whole family, and obviously love bombing that is included with that, you get immediately charmed, especially if you are vulnerable, the way that Jean was in this situation, and then he immediately turns on you. And also some things come to light, like the way that Billy got a job. Because of the probation system, he was lined up to do some decorating job, and again, he couldn't last because he was lazy, he didn't want to keep one. So immediately he was out of job. Now there's another child that he has to take care of as well as his wife, and he immediately started taking that aggression onto other people. The exact same way that he was doing it the whole life as a child. He was supposed to be a caregiver. Nope, he just switched up and went into his own self-fulfilling prophecy, never taking responsibility for anything on his own. So the aggression here, however, and this is the most tragic part of the story, was not limited to Jean, but he was also violent to her daughter as well. He would even end up being brought to court for beating a 5-year-old child, so Jean's daughter from the first marriage. He blamed it all on Jean, as in, he would say like, oh no, Jean would start actually fighting with me, and I'm just there, like, you know, I'm a new man in her life, I'm just trying to discipline the child. But when people looked into those injuries, I feel the child had like fractured ribs, had bruises all over her. He couldn't deny those charges. And again, yet again, when you hear this, you think he will be sent to prison, gotten rid of forever. He got 6 months for beating a 5-year-old who had fractured ribs. So he got 6 months here and he finally ended up getting out in 1972, and the two of them would welcome their daughter Nicola at that stage. I didn't make that super clear. There's nothing justifying how lax that sentence was. However, he was released because of Jean, because she was the witness and she has also testified how she needs him. She was heavily pregnant at that point and how like he's needed at home to provide for the family. So that's why the parole board actually allowed him to be released so soon. And of course, when Billy returned home, the abuse just continued. It was said that he would abuse Jean when she was pregnant, that he would abuse her when she just gave birth, that like when she wouldn't prepare dinner for them, that he would beat her, like when she was just basically breastfeeding Nicola, the new child that she had brought into the world, that he would beat her. He was just a piece of work all the way throughout, and that he continued to actually abuse like the 5-year-old as well. And at this point, like beyond abusing his wife and the kids, the way he would spend his days is hanging out with his brother Alan. The two of them were both in and out of jobs. It was said that Alan actually started having an affair with Jean's married friend, so the brothers started hanging out and taking drugs. And that brings us to one of the most bizarre events in Blackpool history for the time, which happened in August of 1972. Now, yet again, like there's a term here that I was not aware of, and that's Panda Patrol. So Panda Patrol is the police cars patrolling, having broad white stripes that are painted on a dark background, so alluding to the fur of the giant panda. So one such police officer was patrolling in one such car, and they got alerted of a hit and run. And they knew this was a drug area, so they just basically went to check it out. And they go there, and Billy is running from someone's house, from some drug den, and it seemed like he was covered in blood. What proceeded was what the police officers have called the battle in the streets. So the police officer calls for backup. They managed to tackle Alan after they ended up finding the drugs in the boot of their car, and as they just handcuff him, they put him into the car, they're tackling Billy. However, Alan from the car smashes the lock of the vehicle and gets out of the rear window. So again, now Alan is on the loose. They tackle Billy. He is kicking, punching, biting. Finally, they place him in the car, and they are now placing him. The other police officer went to place Alan in the car. Both of them are in the back seat, we assume handcuffed properly. Well, it appears not, because as they're driving towards the prison, whatever, 60 miles per hour, whatever the hell the allowed speed limit is, these brothers managed to take the handle that was on the side, the steel bench that was inside the compartment of the hinges, and they used it to slam the rear doors. So at that point, they're going about 40 to 50 miles per hour when the door is finally open. The two of them, the brothers, just jump onto the road, and they looked back and the two of them were running. So more officers were drafted in, and they started searching for them, and they were finally discovered hiding behind the garage. They didn't stop there. They were still kicking and biting all the way up until they were eventually reprimanded again and brought into the police station, and the police officers had to be hospitalized for their injuries. Like whatever they were taking, whatever drugs they had taken, like they had given basically the Blackpool police in that area the run for their money that day. But also something that I just find bizarre in this case, because it will be repeated itself again. How were these boys handcuffed? Did anybody knows how to use handcuffs at this point? Did anybody just know, like, just handcuff them like behind their back? Because I just cannot understand, because it will repeat itself again, where I'm like, did anybody just know how to use a pair of bloody handcuffs? Because how did they, if properly handcuffed, manage to find whatever to then break a door, both of them? Like, I just cannot comprehend. So here, what you think is, okay, there's been battery of police officers, the two of them have been found with the drugs in their truck, they have clearly been abusing drugs, they're gonna get some substantial prison time. Come on now. Alan got 2.5 years, and Billy was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison, having been convicted of 4 counts of assault causing actual bodily harm. Senior officer would say upon Billy's arrest here, he was regarded here as a schizophrenic. We were always wary of him. We always thought he would kill somebody. Of course, from afar behind prison bars, and with Billy knowing how to sweet talk his way about things, Jean actually accepted to marry him. So during his prison sentence, he ended up getting married. And according to people in the book, this was in order for him to have someone to cling to while in jail. Apparently, between 74 and 76, there were court documents between the two, and also financial support was provided. So it could have been like that it's beneficial for him for the time that he actually gets out of the prison. Apart from that, Billy knew how to thrive in prison by this point. He was a good worker, needing minimum supervision, which would make a lot of sense considering we are soon to talk about a prison escapee. He ended up learning that he was actually great at chess. He was an expert chess player. He would indulge himself in art classes and exploration of painting. He apparently was a good painter because he was a decorator before, so yeah, logically, and was just into woodwork and miniatures. He had glowing work reports, and petitions for parole would still end up being refused because of those personal records of turmoil when it comes to his house. He would also, during this period, get the news of his father's passing, and the dad had like complications with ulcer, and then just within a couple of months ended up passing away. But after this, doubts of how he might respond to release were present in just parole board's minds. His parole hearings here ended up being refused, however, he would still be released from prison in 1976. And at this point, it was said that, of course, logically, he was to return to Jean to basically raise their daughter, and then Jean's daughter from the first marriage. And at this point, Jean lived above a fruit shop. And the place was owned by a woman called Margaret, who basically owned the fruit shop and then owned the lodgings above it. And in the beginning, Margaret would remember everything going smoothly. She even helped Billy place an ad to look for a job, borrowed him a car, and then she kind of decided like, oh no, like I'm the person that's getting the invoices for this ad in the papers, and also in the car I can see that basically he would stupidly steal the fruits from the fruit shop and place them in like the boot of the car, so he's also stealing from me. She, however, Margaret, that is, ignored further abuse that was happening to Jean above that fruit shop. Margaret ignored the screams that she would hear from above because Jean would report that he broke her ribs. Sometimes he would just out of the blue switch up. He switched up on her daughter from the first marriage as well. And by switching up, I mean it was said that he pushed her towards the fire on one occasion just because she refused to speak to him. So he just continued his own ways and everybody just ignored him, and Jean was too vulnerable to act on her own accord. This had continued and probably would have continued for much longer had Billy not found another self-fulfilling prophecy and finally decided to move on. Well, move on partially. I say that very loosely because Billy found a lover here, right? And her name would end up being Teresa. So he would start an affair, I'll talk about Teresa in a while, but that also still didn't mean that he will stop to harass his wife. You would think like, okay, this man has found an affair, like found a mistress, he's moving out, like he's gonna go live with Teresa and just chill, just leave Jean and those two kids alone. No, that's not what he does. So the way that he had met Teresa, she was 5 years older than him and worked as a domestic supervisor for one of the colleges in Blackpool. Teresa was also married before, but it was said that her child was about 18 years at the time, and her child actually ended up like dating one of Billy's drinking buddies, so they would all just hang out together. Both of them loved being outdoors, so that is what really brought the two of them together. And of course, just like with Jean, Teresa saw Billy in a completely different light. She saw him as this guy who knew how to have a good laugh, who like had, I don't know, street cred experience when it came to life. She didn't see him as an abusive man. She didn't know what the hell goes on behind closed doors with this guy. He would move out to live with Teresa. He moved to Chesterfield area. However, he would still keep coming to Jean's place and just pestering the whole family. However, one person in that household, in Jean's household, always remembered her dad as somebody different, as a person in a completely different light to everybody else, and that was Nicola. So over 20 years later, Nicola would actually give an interview for Daily Mail saying that she loved her dad, that when she used to see him, he was all over her, he was treating her like a princess, that he took her to town, that he really like either made sure to gift her something, that he also decorated her room with teddy bear wallpaper, that she spent her entire childhood believing that her dad's criminality was the product of his desire to look after them. And in my opinion here, this is purely because Billy saw her as his biological daughter, and when it came to Jean's daughter from another marriage, he just never saw her as his. So he just decided to treat her as somebody who is less worthy, who is less of, which is such a mind-fucked way to think about things, that this man ended up being with women who had children. Like, then just choose somebody who doesn't have kids. I mean, just don't choose anybody because you'll end up being an abusive piece of shit. But if he only just chose people who didn't have kids, like there were other options. But this man just chose whoever he could abuse, whoever was the most vulnerable, really. And this is who Jean was here. So upon one more charge of burglary, Billy ends up being released out of prison again. And if the courts ever needed proof that this man would never stop, it would have been the events of the night of September in 1976. Because the hostage situation that we're going to talk about in part 2 was not the first time that Billy would hold people hostage. The same way that like you already escaped prison and people are like, eh, let's send him to prison, like, and not do much about it, like if he escapes, he escapes. The exact same thing where you're like, okay, so he already escaped from prison, first thing. Second thing, he managed to escape from a car while being transported to prison and just run and then was caught. Third thing, he held people hostage. Like all of the red flags, all of the things that we're going to talk about towards the end of this video and then in part 2, and people are like, you know what, what could possibly go wrong in the future? This thing that I'm just to describe to you is an actual horror movie scene. Because he wouldn't stop abusing Jean, right? So Jean still lived in fear of him coming back and was doing everything to protect the daughters, so she had like a third person stay in with them in that flat. And one night Billy just decides to break in, and everybody else apart from this third person, this guest, is staying downstairs and they're all sleeping upstairs. He breaks in and manages to get into the living room where this woman is sleeping and rapes her, assaults her, and then proceeds to go upstairs with an axe, as in the weapon, and then when he's in this room, he bashes another friend's head. So like another friend is staying with Jean for protection, he bashes her head with an axe. Everybody's screaming, the kids are screaming, people are thinking like, Jean was thinking this is the end, this is how we all die. Whereas Billy just decided to then stop this violence and then bring this friend who he had just battered with an axe into the bathroom to wash her bloody wound on the head. Again, like the horror that all of these people must have felt in this situation is just immense. And everybody thought, again, he's gonna pick up an axe. Like, there's no way any of us is getting out of this situation alive. However, after a few hours, Billy just stood up and left the house. For holding people hostage for 2 hours, for causing really body harm, for basically attempted murder of like everybody in this house, he ended up getting 9 months imprisonment. But here, the book doesn't make it super clear. Did he just not serve any time in prison? Was he just out on bail, awaiting parole? Because he actually ends up moving to Chesterfield with his mistress Teresa, so he manages to leave town. And now, just resorting to violence will not be enough. This is the last part of his offenses, so like the third part, that final escalation, where rape ended up being part of his offenses. And truly, I think had he not been reprimanded and then later escaped from prison and committed his final crimes, I feel like this is when he finally realized, like, oh no, nothing was enough at this point, and he would have then included rape in all of his other offenses, and possibly then also resorted to just murdering people as part of his offenses. I truly think, like, Billy would have resorted to serial killing of some kind later, and definitely becoming a serial rapist. Because on the night of 21st of August, while he's still out of jail, how fuck knows, he goes into this club, and there's a young couple in the club that he had just met that evening. But this couple, it was said, like, they were immediately uncomfortable, and they didn't know what his deal was. Like, is he looking for a fur? Like, is he, what is he trying to make buddies? Whatever the hell he is. But they kind of forget about him, and they think like he left the club, so they start heading home. The aliases given to this couple would be Mr. K and Miss C. The way Billy described this event is that Mr. K started off an argument that then resulted in a fight. Of course, none of it was Billy's fault, at this leisure park, at this car park area. And then, because Billy was so strong after having exercised in the gym for so long, he managed to overpower this man that again had started a fight. And once he had done so, Miss C, so his girlfriend, voluntarily accepted to have sex with him. Rather, he used a term that made me so repulsed by this man, just as if I hadn't been repulsed by him already. He said she was responsive to sex. Like, if you have to say somebody was responsive to sex, honestly, it sounds like you're a freaking necrophiliac. So, of course, that didn't happen. Rather, what Billy had done, he had managed to overpower the man first here and ended up hitting Mr. K with a brick, and then ended up dragging his girlfriend all the way to the docks area and raping her. And then I think even that he managed to pull her across back to that leisure car park, and this is when she ended up being discovered, because Mr. K regained consciousness, he called the police, he explained what had happened, and then the girlfriend was actually discovered. The next morning, the press has heard of this unknown rapist. Everybody's on high alert, the police is going door to door, and everybody has kind of like a sketch of a general description. And it would be actually Teresa's brother, where he would be hiding out, and he just gave him up. Basically, the police knocked at his door, and Billy was just in the background. They were like, that looks like the guy from the sketch. That looks like the guy that had just been described, and it also has been in the prison system for like since the day he had been born. So here finally, when he was brought into the police station, the scene of crime police officer would say, with Billy sitting in front of him, that he remembers him looking through the camera lens and just getting a shock from the cold stare behind Billy's eyes. Billy's gaze was so direct, cold grey eyes. I never get spooked, but there was just something about him. He never spoke once, and I was on my own with him for several minutes. Every suspect says something, but he didn't. Just that cold grey stare. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, even then. And that was before Pottery Cottage. Every single person, every single police officer in this story is like, he would kill. No, he will kill one day. Why don't we just let him out to do that, to commit that final crime? Because this was the 1970s and communications between police stations did not exist, and you remember now Billy's in Chesterfield area. The courts were not privy to the information on his previous offenses until it was too late. I feel like they had to wait for the paperwork to be transferred. And because of this, he was never given an extra layer of security. You would think an offense of rape would warrant that, but no. He is now in prison awaiting trial. And this is when, because all of those prisons would have different jobs, he is having a job as kind of like a sous chef inside of prison kitchens. And this is where he would work, and then on certain days he would have to appear in front of a judge for the trial to just be arranged, for him to basically, and his lawyers to ask for parole and bail and all of that. But he is now within prison and working within prison kitchens. If you recall from earlier on, when Billy had been imprisoned, he was categorized as category B inmate. And at that point, that might have made some sense, right? There was no hostage attempt, there was no prison escape, there was no Billy beating a 5-year-old and breaking her ribs. However, at this point, Billy still is in jail as a category B inmate, so by default he's allowed to have jobs and to face other inmates, and he is working inside of prison kitchens. So on the morning of 3rd of December 1976, Billy heads for work for his shift in the prison kitchen. He is fully aware that a guard would collect him before the end of his shift for the journey to court. He spends the time cutting meat, making sandwiches until his escort arrives. In what is established as the routine here, because he now goes between the court and the prison, because he's still awaiting sentencing for the rape of Miss C. So he changes from the prison uniform into civilian clothing at the reception, and there's other prisoners there that were waiting for the same minibus. 2 of them were bound to go to Chesterfield and the other one for Burton-on-Trent. And the men were handcuffed in pairs and then they would be seated to the vehicle. The minibus stops for the first handover driving to Chesterfield, and this is where the police took custody of the 2 remaining remands. All seemed normal until the court official appeared with a message for the people that were escorting Billy to phone HMP Leicester, and once they did, they found out that a boning knife had been missing from the prison kitchens. Immediately everything starts moving because there's a whole knife now missing from the prisons. There are some prisoners that are in transit. They start searching the prisoners that worked there together with their cells, while the 2 officers spent an hour trawling through the refuse skip. The regulating officer realized that Billy had actually been in the kitchens but was no longer on the premises, so they were asked to intercept him on the way to Chesterfield, to the courts, but it seemed to have been too late. So now the people who were in charge of Billy on the way were asked to search him and basically to question him. He, of course, denied any knowledge of the knife, and he was found to have nothing on him. Once he hears about the new court date, he is handcuffed to one of the 2 escorts and he returns back to his prison cell that has been searched in his absence. In reception, he changes his clothes and ends up being led back to the cell, and from this point on he just melts into the background and everybody just discards him as a possible person who might have stolen that boning knife from the kitchens, even though he had definitely worked that kitchen shift that morning. Just to put an emphasis on this, because nobody does, everybody knows there's a missing knife. A missing knife had not been found, so even the next day the missing knife had not been found, and the inmates are just allowed to go back to their shifts. Billy is, everybody else is, they just go back and just everybody pretends like, you know what, yes, everybody knows there has been a missing knife, it has been stolen, but we have done our best, we have searched everything and everybody, and now we just move on. And they just do. Like it's the most normal thing, like everybody will forget about this and that knife will never reappear in the future to haunt us. Explain it, make it make sense. To discuss this, there are events, or rather another prisoner later that claimed that knife might have been taken out of the prison on the same day and then returned. And that possibility has to be taken into consideration. Because here one of the 2 things in my mind could have happened. Either Billy had an accomplice here, or he again found a loophole. And the loophole possibly could have been that because he knew on that day he's definitely having to appear in court and then was to return to prison, he knew like they're not gonna search him well, like if he is intercepted when going to court, and then obviously the prison cell is going to be searched in his absence and they're not going to find anything. He must have known on like all of the loopholes in the prison system by this point. And by default then he must have known that the people that were even in charge of him won't be alerted until he is again at a particular location and everybody notices that the boning knife is missing, and yes, then they're gonna search him, but he maybe knew how to hide the thing on his body, or again might have had an accomplice. But once this story continues, you will learn that these pat downs, not tap downs, what you say? These pat downs, these strip searches were not done as properly as they should have been done. I mean, I'm telling you, everybody moved on, knowing that the knife is missing from the kitchens. So I'm not really going to be like, oh my god, this is the most extensive pat down, this is the most extensive strip search that has ever been done on any of these people. Probably not, because it will be a month. A whole month, actually over a month, between him stealing a knife on the 3rd of December and then the 12th of January, that Billy will be in a possession of a knife inside of a prison over a month, where somebody could have found that boning knife, but they didn't. During the Christmas period, Billy will appear in court, and his lawyer would claim the decision on his sentence would be reached by the 5th of January. So he has a kitchen shift on the 5th of January, has a whole rub down, which they were said to be variable in quality, and there's a hired car that's used to transport Billy. He was handcuffed to an officer in the back seat, and there's another officer next to the driver. Here, when he appears in court, the bail just hasn't been granted to him, and he was said to remain in custody until the 12th of January, which is when they're gonna see him in court again. It was said that Billy was fine, just making general talk with the others in a car, and saying that he hopes to get bail on the date of the 12th. On average, it was said that the prisoners could expect around 10 weeks to pass between the time they were first remanded and the committal. And in Billy's case, because of the result of delays he himself had insisted upon, there were 4 months that had elapsed since he was arrested, and this time in January that we are speaking of now. This leaves no doubt in my mind that for 4 months Billy was plotting. He was figuring out all of the loopholes, he was figuring out the transportation system between different parties, between the kitchen and then the cells, between the days that he was spent in court and then the prison again, familiarizing himself with the route and plotting his escape. And I say that because Billy's next departure from prison will end up being his last. This brings us to the 12th of January 1977. By this point, Billy had a few things working for him. He had opportunity and he had violence. On that day, however, there would be another circumstance that went into Billy's favor. It was said that the weather on that day was appalling. Hailing, storming, blizzard, there was snow on the roads, anything you can really imagine. So at 7:45 a.m., the prison officers that were tasked with escorting Billy to his hearing reported for duty. The officers collecting Billy would be Simmons, who had worked for that prison for about 3 years, and then there would be a senior officer with 14 years of experience called Sprintle. A standard search of Billy had been done. This included running their fingers around the collar of his shirt, across the waistcoat, and then along and inside and outside of his legs, before checking for his pockets. One thing that nobody had thought to check for, though, was Billy's boots. The way that these pat-downs have been described by Sprintle himself in this interview that I have found was that there was no reason to suspect that the suspect was dangerous, because he was just classified as a normal prisoner. The only thing that they knew was that he was there on the charge of rape. Apparently, this, however, wasn't serious enough, so if they knew that he was of violent nature, he would have been strip searched.
Is it normal for the warders to be told anything about the background of the men they're escorting?
If the authorities know anything about him, then we should definitely have been told.
Did you take any security precautions before you got into the taxi?
We took the normal precautions for a prisoner of the type that we knew him to be, which was virtually nothing. He was given a normal rub-down search in reception prior to leaving the prison. Nothing was found on him.
Sprintle describes how they did the usual thing, where they tie the prisoner to one of the officers and then the other officer sits in the front of the car next to the driver. Now, when I tell you that a prisoner is handcuffed to an officer, what do you picture? Because I didn't picture this correctly, right? So, do you picture both of those individuals being handcuffed with one pair of handcuffs, right? So, like, it's as if my wrist here is handcuffed to yours over there, with like the whole arm just free to do whatever the hell, to, I don't know, high five at each other, and how absurd this decision is, because I didn't picture it that way. I thought, again, handcuffs, you know, the way they work, just handcuff both of his hands behind his back, and then he's handcuffed to an officer. I don't know why I thought that. I didn't think that it's going to be this absurd, but apparently it is. So the method of handcuffing meant that one of Billy's hands will end up being free. Now, Sprinkle is in the front passenger seat, but now we have to talk about another transportation thing, which boggles everybody's mind in this case. And that is that Billy will end up being transported in a cab. So not like a bus, not like any official vehicle by the prison service, nope. They get into the car and there's a cab driver that called this steady money, because apparently this was another thing that was routine. Apart from the rub downs and everything, this was also the routine, driving inmates to court hearings. They would say in the book that there would be about 24,000 journeys that were made transporting inmates in hired cars. I don't know if that's annual or if that's like total, but the only thing I could think of is like, we are pissed off at like where taxpayers' money is going today. Like, imagine finding out your money, the money you're paying for taxis, is going for actual cabs transporting inmates to and from hearing. I don't know, I'd be fucking fuming. I hope this doesn't happen today. Oh my god, please don't Google this and tell me this happens today. I would genuinely, I would not be surprised. I would definitely not be surprised with like anything that's going on right now. Anyways, while they're driving now, so there's a cabbie, right? There's a cabbie transporting a police officers and a prison inmate. Sprinkle is in the front, sitting next to him, and once the guys have been handcuffed one to the other, Simmons and Billy, basically the keys to the handcuffs have been given to Sprinkle in front so that he puts them on like his holster, whatever. And then the two of them are sitting behind, high-fiving each other. I don't know, they're sitting tied with one handcuff on each other's wrists, and they're just on their merry way to this court. And it seemed like Billy picked up, they're going onto the motorway, and as soon as he did, he starts saying how he's going to burst, like he needs to have number two, he needs to poop, and everybody's like, okay mate, you like have to wait. However, just at that point, they see travel services, so like basically the toilets, I think like it was a gas station, the place where he knew there would be a toilet. And well, they realize like, okay, might as well have this pit stop and then we'll continue this journey to court. So, as they exit now the vehicle, with Billy being handcuffed to the guy, one of the police officers takes the keys for the handcuffs from the other, and they just take his handcuffs off and hear him using the toilet. They hear all the normal things like flushing and then like him washing the hands. And later it would be said that Billy must have used this time to take the knife from the hiding spot, either his boots or in between his legs, and he put it in a better position. So he just comes back docile, like gets tied to the other police officers, gets into the car, no issue, and they continue their journey. A couple of minutes into this journey now, Sprinkle had said that he had felt something at the back of his neck, like a violent blow. And at first he thought like maybe the driver had hit the brakes, like maybe they had been hit by a lorry. However, this is when he has that warm feeling around his neck and he feels blood.
Well, everything was all right on the journey to Chesterfield. You know, there's a little bit of conversation about motor cars and fishing, things like this. And as we took the slip road off the M1, the A617 to Chesterfield, I felt this violent blow in the back of my neck. My immediate thoughts were that we'd been hit by a lorry or something from behind. But I put my hand up to the back of my neck like this, and I just felt a load of flesh and blood. I didn't realise then that I had been stabbed.
And do you remember anything after that?
Well, things got a bit hazy as time went on. You know, I was losing a lot of blood.
And everything starts moving really fast. Like, he doesn't even have time to process this, because after putting the boning knife through Sprinkel's throat, Billy starts demanding the keys, and he starts attacking and kind of like stabbing, basically swording the knife with his free arm with Simmons, like in the back seat as well, and he manages to harm him. So from both of them now, he's demanding the keys. As he's demanding for keys and nobody's really listening to him, he plunges the knife into Simmons's throat and palm, just leaving him fighting for his life. And now the cab driver is just completely stunned by the speed of the attacks. So by this point, they were at a traffic island, and he just told them to keep going. Sprinkle manages to hand him over the keys for the handcuffs, and now with the keys and like with both of his hands free, he just has a completely free range to just stab these individuals the way he wanted. So he forces both of them to now be handcuffed, both of these police officers, to each other, forces Sprinkle to go from the front seat, from the passenger seat, onto the back seat, and to basically dunk down. Both of them are dunking down, both of them have been stabbed in the neck, they're thinking their lives are over, and Billy is still in the back, like with the two of them, just trying for the others, for anybody on the road, not to understand what's going on. And this is when finally, with these two subdued, he actually puts that knife to the driver's stomach and tells him to like just drive away until a certain isolated spot.
The prisoner made me climb. He handcuffed me to my mate. He demanded the keys, kept prodding us with this knife. Demanded the keys, and he handcuffed me to my colleague. And he eventually told us to get out of the car. He said, when the car stops, you two get out and get across the fields.
And your colleague called for help, I presume?
Well, we stopped oncoming traffic. I believe it was a GPO breakdown van. Well, a large lorry with a lot of equipment on. And a young ginger-haired chap, I don't know his name. He helped us quite a lot. He dressed my wound. He had a pair of bolt croppers on his lorry, and he cut us free.
And you were quite badly wounded?
Yes, I've heard since that I came very close to death.
In this complete haze, these police officers were the ones to leave the car first, and they're just bleeding in the snow. They're really weak. They're just trying to walk and hopefully thinking that they will eventually have enough strength to like alert somebody. And then he tells the driver also to leave and not to come back until he's gone. And he puts himself in the driver's seat and drives off. Somebody luckily passed by and just saw the bloodied man and ended up calling the ambulance. At 10:07, the police actually appeared, but they couldn't speak to these police officers because of their wounds. They were actually transported, like a lot of their wounds almost cut to the bone. They had to have multiple surgeries on them as well. But this is exactly, in my opinion, what Billy had wanted, for the two of them to be that incapacitated that they can't even say anything, they can't even give away any evidence. And it wouldn't take them long to find the car. The car would be found at 10:23 a.m. and it had crashed into a wall on the moors 2 miles from the Red Lion, in the vicinity of Hellbank Plantation. So now the searches begin, and they're looking how far somebody like Billy could have walked from this spot. Enter Peter House, the person that was the officer that was now responsible for the search for Billy, and also one of the people that had written the book that I have read on this case. Given the position of the car, the police thought it's probable that Billy had been heading for Blackpool and still might aim to reach the A6, perhaps just hiding out until he could find further transportation. And then, like working in the police office, like with their sketches and kind of radius of the location, House started from the last place that their quarry was known to have been, the crash site on Billy Moor. So basically they drew like 2 circles, one of 3 miles radius and then the other one of 6 miles. And then using the survey maps, they would identify the most likely places that Billy might have been in. They also alerted the press and also took care of his family. They put them all in the refuge just in case he decides to basically show up and cause even more havoc. So initial police search, obviously like from 10 a.m., they immediately start searching, picking up the scent, bringing the dogs in, going through the heavy snowfall and trying to find footprints. They knew that would kind of not really be the plausible option here. However, they then start searching local properties, farms and outbuildings. Within the first few hours, it was said that the police had searched 256 properties. However, they found nothing. So here is where I have another question for you. If you want to pause the video and leave it in the comments, if you were Billy here, what would you have done? Because yet again, and I don't believe that I'm going to give him any credit here, but I think he did the right thing. And also, again, I don't think there was any thought process. I don't think he premeditated this part of the case. Well, rather he probably thought that running when he's bloodied, has blood on him, looks like somebody who might have escaped prison, looks like somebody who isn't dressed properly for any sort of occasion, to be like outside in that weather and like knowing that the police is immediately going to look for him. I don't think that he planned to, like, I don't know, catch rides forever and just like be on the run. I feel like the plan in his head was always to find some sort of shelter. I just don't think that he had planned how he would do that. And I don't think he had planned another thing, which was that he had, while like jumping over this rocky slope, lose a knife as well. So he had lost a knife, but he had also made sure not to be seen, because nobody would really have seen Billy that day. And you kind of like have to think about, like, yeah, we didn't have systems in place, like we didn't have Holmes' system in place where any like witness testimonies would have been taken into account. But in this case also that wouldn't have helped, because nobody had seen Billy since that car crash. So he managed to again blend into the background and just walked until this place actually materialized itself in front of him. According to the accounts, also, Billy did the exact opposite from what the officers have thought that he would do, based off of, obviously, once they discovered the location, and then comparing that to Billy Moore. So he had walked for over 4 miles of exposed moorland, despite of the blizzard, despite of the weather conditions, heading north across these frozen areas, and 2 hours later he reached Baslow Road in Eastmoor. And this would have actually been close to a motorway, close to A619. And one of the first residences that he would have seen would have been Pottery Cottage. However, he would actually, was said in the book, have seen another place before. Just as he is walking aimlessly, there's a house that comes into view, and the first house had a car that just seemed to have parked in. So it is believed either he was spooked or he might have seen a man at the wheel, thought somebody was coming home, and thought that's too much of a hassle, like I can't overpower anybody here, I don't have a weapon, like I don't have anything on me. However, then soon he won't need it, because the house that materialized itself in front of him had a shed in the corner, and in front of that shed was a wood pile where 2 axes were laying next to each other. Billy picked both of them up and started walking towards the door. The door that he would open would be the back door that led towards a kitchen, where a woman called Amy was standing washing the dishes. Amy knew immediately, looking at Billy, that he meant trouble. Her potato peeler dropped right off of her hands, and she knew that her best chances to survive were to comply with this man. Billy proceeded to enter and lock the kitchen door, and he said that he is wanted by the police, but he is not going to hurt her. So as the woman stared at him without giving a word, like without screaming for help, without doing anything, Billy asked her, "Who lives here? Tell me who lives here." So let us talk about who lived at the Pottery Cottage where Billy had just entered. There was a woman called Amy Minton, the one that is currently facing Billy inside of that kitchen. She was born to an unmarried laundry worker in Midlands town of Solihull. Amy's childhood would be spent at her grandparents' home, and this would be until her mother remarried and then moved them to the stepfather's house. Amy would marry a guy called Arthur Minton, hence the last name. This man would be a grocer, and again, they had a great marriage for about 6 years, until a life-changing motor accident that left Arthur handicapped. His leg had to be amputated, and it was said that this took some mental toll on him, however that he was tough in both body and spirit and ended up adapting well to using an artificial limb. He also remained active in the shop, so he wasn't idle at all, and he was fully supporting his wife through the heavier duties until the first pregnancy. Now they would end up having 2 daughters, Barbara, born in 36, and Jill, born in 38. And I have realized that I have said that last sentence in such a way that makes you think like Arthur just gave up on the family. No, he didn't. Both of them worked really hard to give these kids the best life that they had wanted. Jill apparently wanted like really expensive dolls as her birthday presents, but her dad would work enough to be able to afford that for her. All of the kids also expressed a huge love for animals, and they would have these animals and they would end up having pets wherever they went in life. Jill was described as a happy, uncomplicated, and content teenager, but it was said that she lacked confidence. So she was shy, but she forced herself out to meet people, she was strong-willed, and she was quite envied by the other schoolmates for her ability to just see through anything that she set out to do. As it was a custom during that time, usually after school, what awaited most women would have been some sort of admin secretarial job. But this is what Jill really wanted to do, so she attended secretarial college, and parents kind of helped her out with the fees, and she was rewarded immediately with an office job. And this is when she ended up meeting who would become her husband, called Richard Moran. Richard was a handsome young Irishman with dark hair and an immediate grin that would just attract people like Jill. It was said that during their first date, they immediately decided that this is a relationship for life. It was a dance at this place where Richard told her if she was not married within a year, that he was going to be the one to marry her. Richard promised Jill that any children that they were to have together would want for nothing. They would be full of energy and ambition, and he would do his best for them all. At that moment, neither of them was earning much, and also Jill was worried about her parents having to move, fearing that his dad's disability would also mean that she can't actually contribute take care of him and the mom. So the solution was simple. Arthur and Amy, so the mom and dad, sold their business and they relocated to Derbyshire, which would be with Jill and Richard, sharing their modern home in a busy commuter village south of Chesterfield. For years, Jill's and Richard's marriage was everything they could have hoped for. However, as you remember, Richard promised Jill that those kids that they end up having will not want for anything, will have everything provided for them. However, the kids just didn't end up coming. So the couple decided to adopt a child named Sarah Jane. And with a child now, they realize the place that they have been in is too small, so they decide to move, where one place will stand out from the rest. And this place was called North End Farm. This would be an 18th century pottery barn divided into 4 homes. It was near the A619 Chesterfield Road in Eastmoor. The location was said to be partially in the nature, so part of the views would be into the Peak District National Park, but it wasn't completely isolated. It was said that they had chosen the house because of its size and also because it was in the nice area. It was partially isolated, one part of the house was overlooking Peak District National Park. But again, there were a few properties that were scattered around the road. Just for example, around 200 yards away, there was a building that was occupied by a professional couple in their early 50s. Their neighbors at the far end of the building were the head teachers at Church of England primary schools. They were called Len and Joyce Newman. And they have lived there since the previous summer and owned a section next to it. And then there was a smaller property that was sort of adjacent to Pottery Cottage, but was empty for 2 years, and it was in the process of being renovated by a young man, but this man seemed to be in no hurry to move into it. So there was nobody really occupying this place that was just adjacent to it at this given time. So there was nobody really occupying this place that was adjacent to Pottery Cottage at this given moment. The way that the house was split now was that Morans, so Jill and her husband, would reside to the right of the house, and then Mintons, so Amy and Arthur, Jill's parents, would be on the left. The dividing line, broadly speaking, would be the wall that would separate the Mintons' lounge from the Morans' kitchen. So looking at the house from the road, the Morans would reside to the right, Mintons in the smaller part to the left. Each of these units had their own toilet and bathroom facilities, but then there were the connecting doors via the hallway into each part. Now, there were no connecting doors between the upstairs rooms. Now, because I couldn't find a floor plan anywhere online, I will just be putting the pictures of the house from the outside. Again, looking at the house from the road, from the right, the first bedroom was occupied by Jill and her husband, then the next smaller bedroom by Sarah, the daughter, and the last was a spare room. This is next to Minton's bathroom, and the last room was Minton's bedroom, so Amy and Arthur's bedroom. Pottery Cottage was also big enough for quite a few pets. There was Emma, the hound, there was a black Labrador that was named William, there was Ginger the cat, and there was Bobo the rabbit. And Sarah started attending school when she was 5. Her granddad Arthur worked there. Richard also got a promotion, so he was working as a sales director for a company. Jill was working as a secretary for an accountant firm. And Amy was also earning pocket money cleaning the house of the Newmans that just lived down the road as their neighbors, and also exercising their dog every single day in their garden. Everybody that lived in the Pottery Cottage was described as just superb, great individuals who were always out there to help people. But especially Richard and Jill, because they were younger, so they had more of a social life, and they would bring that social life into the Pottery Cottage. So it was said they participated in different social clubs in the area, different humanitarian organizations, and they also organized dinners at the Pottery Cottage. And in one such dinner and in one such club, they actually met this other couple who was also struggling to conceive for a child, and they shared their adoption story when it comes to how they adopted Sarah, and helped this couple adopt their own daughter, who then in turn played with Sarah, and Sarah kind of took the role of a bigger sister. So the life at the Pottery Cottage was just vibrant. Everything was a routine. The couple would leave to work, and Sarah would be basically transported to school. Amy would have a job here and there, while Arthur worked as a caretaker in Sarah's school. Everything was going smoothly until that blizzard brought Billy Hughes through their door in January of 1977. The 4 days prior to Billy Hughes entering the door and surprising Amy while she was preparing lunch were quite mundane, nothing out of the ordinary when it comes to the Pottery Cottage. On Saturday evening, Jill and Richard were dining out with their friends. Then on Monday, after Richard left for work, Jill took Sarah to the school, and then she invited her parents to just share the meal that she cooked for herself and Sarah. Richard ended up having a dinner meeting outside, but then he returned home, and this would be the night when the temperatures and the weather just went to shit. Tuesday morning, Richard and Jill leave for work, and once Jill returns home, she remembers that Amy, her mom, had actually complained about the weather and how she didn't manage to go to the Newmans that day to actually exercise their dog. And this would, without them knowing, be the final few hours of peace that were upon them. Wednesday morning, Jill wakes up and she decides, as usual, to let the pets out for a run. She and Richard would sit down to eat breakfast, and it was said that Sarah didn't like eating breakfast, but Jill would always make sure to make the lunch for her to bring into school. Richard would tell Jill that his last appointment for that day is around 4 p.m, so it should take no more than an hour, and then he's going to drive straight home, so he should be there for dinner. Richard drives out, and as usual around 8:30, Jill also puts her coat on and takes Sarah to school. Because this would have been before 10:23, so like before Billy's car had been found, on her way to work, Jill wouldn't have seen any police cars, she wouldn't have had any way to be alerted that there is a lookout on somebody in this area. And she just went to make it to her desk, to her work on time. So her day at the office ended around 3 o'clock. And at this point, again, the blizzard is just bitching, okay? So she's trying her best to get to her house. So she's driving home, and it was said that there were 3 police cars around the area that might have given somebody a second thought. But she neither listened to the radio while at work, nor did she buy a newspaper. And obviously, like, just seeing police cars on the road doesn't really have to mean anything. It might just be meaning that they're patrolling in the area. So upon reaching Pottery Cottage after work, Jill forgot all about the police cars because the gate that was always locked to prevent the dogs from running out onto the road was now open wide. She leaves the car in the garage and just starts wondering, why did her parents fail to lock the gate? Like, they must have been busy, did something happen? But she could not have expected in her worst nightmares that when she actually walked through the back door and pressed the handle, she would have been faced with Amy, her mom, that kind of seemed normal at first. But Amy's first words were anything but normal. As Jill went inside of the warm kitchen, her mom Amy told her, "Don't panic, Jill, but there's a man here with a knife. He's hiding from the police. Keep calm, he won't hurt us." And that is where we'll pick up in part 2 with the most insane ending to this story, as if this part hasn't been already the most berserk. I have never pronounced that word out loud, as you can tell. But what are your thoughts on this story so far? Do you agree with me that this man could have been stopped, could have been just imprisoned for a substantial amount of time, some mental health checks provided, maybe some medication, because I genuinely think like something could have possibly worked. None of this should have happened. What will happen in part 2 is genuinely a horror story. If you haven't already thought, like, certain parts of this video were very just fiction-like, really just horror movie stuff that just is to be portrayed on the screen, and you're like, oh no, that's not realistic. Yeah, just wait for part 2. And if you haven't heard about this story, if you don't actually know what happens, stick with me until part 2, because I think that is the genius of this book, the actual genius, that up until the last, I would say the last few pages, I had no idea where it's going, and then my mind was just blown. I was like, no, that is impossible, like, no. And that's when I knew I had to cover it, because I was like, this is just too mind-blowing. This man was allowed to go out, to escape from prison. Every single part of this was allowed. So let me know what you think about that case so far. And also, do you agree with me that there is some Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing going on here, where just Billy isn't a genius scientist, okay, I'm gonna say that. He isn't Jekyll in himself. All of it is fictional, Maya. But that he does never take responsibility for his actions, that he does think of himself in this light of just a person on some dumb pursuit, just continuing the same freaking cycle. And just that is what he had been hearing since his early teenage years. Justification and justifications in plural for his actions. So why would he have ever taken any sort of responsibility, any sort of actions? And also partially it wasn't on him, partially it was on the system to make sure that he actually rehabilitates, offer him some mental health support, any type of support that he actually manages to then immerse himself into the society and reintegrate there. But that was just never done, which will then culminate in what we discussed in part 2, unfortunately. But until then, if you are interested in more deep dive content, in me reading more true crime books and then doing multi-parters, make sure you recommend this content, you share, you click share, subscribe, like, and do all of that good stuff. And my stomach has been stomaching right now. It's been stomaching for about an hour. Because sodas don't help, and I drink a lot of Coke to basically survive and push through the recording days. So that's great. You know what? If there's a way, I just wish, even though that is morbid as hell, right? When my test results come back, they discover there's a part they can just eliminate the motherfucking part that I don't need in my body, that where everything is inflamed, and then I live happily ever after. That is what I hope for, and it will most probably not happen, but listen, here it is right now. I hope we can figure it out and we can remove the inflamed part of Maya that isn't like her soul and heart, and then she can just move on. Cool. That sentence is done, and Maya is out. Super old. Grandma Maya out. Grandma Maya out. World. Smallest violin playing for a 30-year-old with stomach issues. Every other person, not every other, but I swear there's like 1 in 5 people that have stomach issues. I have definitely invented this on the spot right here, right now, yes. You Google that, or don't, or just believe her, and a person on YouTube telling you scientific facts that she does not know of. Okay, up to you. Do what you do. You take responsibility for your own beliefs. Okay, cool. Bye. Maya out now. Maya out. Such a grandma. Such a fucking old person.